to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I wanted to look back at history and look at a team that I thought was in a similar situation to that the New York Giants are in now. As a matter of fact, they were probably in a worse situation, in my opinion, 3 years ago. And that is the San Francisco 49ers. Because at least right now, the New York Giants have their quarterback in place in a Daniel Jones. The Niners didn't have that. They have a playmaker in a Saquon Barkley. The Niners really didn't have that. They had no playmakers. They had a better offensive line. And they didn't. In 2016, as a matter of fact, they had the 32nd ranked blocking offensive line, run blocking in all of football. And I think they were 30th in pass blocking. So in 2016, they were actually very bad. They were a 2-14 football team with Kyle Shanahan. And, they really didn't have much. And in this video, I'm going to go over what they did and why I think it's very similar in terms of who they brought in to be the head coach and what I think the New York Giants have to do and what we as a fan base should expect. And we should come in with some patience. That is what I will say. I continue to say that. Don't expect this to be flipped around in 1 year. The 49ers, when Shannon took the job, were 2-14. Like I said, they were in a worse position than the Giants are now. But they were given the ability to build the team the right way. They brought in a new general manager, something the New York Giants did not do in a John Lynch. But they brought in Kyle Shannon, and I'm not saying him and Joe Judge are equal in terms of experience. Kyle Shannon, we all know, was a very good offensive coordinator with the Atlanta Falcons and was widely credited for Matt Ryan's MVP season, which is why he got the head coaching job. But nevertheless, he had no head coaching experience. And the guys he brought on to be his assistants had no coaching experience, no great resumes whatsoever. And I'm going to get into them. I'm also going to get into the links as to why they were hired. Shanahan was hired at the same age of that of a Joe Judge at 38 years old. And he basically has the same strategy outside of the fact that I believe he calls the plays at San Francisco, being that he was a great offensive coordinator. But he brought in guys he was familiar with that may have not had the most unbelievable resumes. And they've had success here in their third years. They are right now probably the favorites to win the Super Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers. And they attacked it in the draft. They attacked it with some great undrafted free agency pickups. They brought in some free agents that worked out, but most didn't. I'm going to get into that. Most of their success came from the draft and trades. They made a couple of trades. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo being the first one. They stole Jimmy Garoppolo from the New England Patriots for a second-round pick. They also, made a trade for Emmanuel Sanders. They made a couple of other moves as well. But their draft is where they built their team, and that is where I think the New York Giants have to do the same thing. They have to copy this model. They have to do what the 49ers did, and we have to be patient. But I'm going to get into their career and how Kyle Shanahan went about choosing his coaches, and I think you're going to see a lot of similarities to that of a Joe Judge. But let's jump right into it. There is Kyle Shanahan, who at the time was a first-year head coach, and here is his resume. And it's nothing that's crazy. You're not going to see any head coaching experience, much like that of a Joe Judge. Came in as a graduate assistant in 2003 with UCLA, was an offensive quality control coach with the Tampa Bay Bucks. So he immediately got head coaching, coaching experience in the NFL. Wide receivers coach in 2006 with the Houston Texans, quarterbacks coach in 2007, offensive coordinator from 08 to 09. Then became the OC with the Redskins from 10 to 13. Offensive coordinator with the Browns in 14, and offensive coordinator with the Falcons in 15 and 16 before getting the head coaching job with the San Francisco 49ers. Like I said, definitely had a stronger resume, in terms of the fact that he was an offensive coordinator. Our guy was a special teams coach, but the guys he brought in, very similar resumes to that of the guys we brought in. The first guy I'm going to look at is that of a Patrick Saleh, guy that, Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. A guy that a lot of New York Giants fans were excited to bring in here as a head coach. Well, if you go back and look at this guy's resume, nothing pops off the chart, and you're going to see they had a link. They both coached with the Houston Texans between 2005 and I believe 2008. I think that's where Shannon was there, maybe through 2007. But nevertheless, that was the link. But this guy didn't have any, unbelievable resume. He was a defensive assistant for 2 years at Michigan State, defensive assistant at Central Michigan, went to Georgia, was a defensive assistant, went to the Houston Texans, was a defensive intern, then became the quality control coach for 3 years, then the assistant linebacker coach for 2, defensive quality control coach for the Seahawks for 3 years, the linebackers coach for 3 years with the Jaguars. Of course, they had a strong defense, and then got the DC position for the last 3 years with the San Francisco 49ers, and he's been widely credited with the strength in that defense. But much like the guy we brought in, Patrick Graham, it's not like Robert Saleh had this unbelievable resume, and the first 2 years, you would have probably said he wasn't doing a good job, because the 49ers in 2017 were 6-10, in 2018 were 4-12, and this year they were 13-3. And a lot of people point to Nick Bosa, and Nick Bosa has a lot to do with that, but I also think the fact that these draft picks got older and older and more experienced has a lot to do with it as well. They also made a trade for D Ford, which helped. And I'm going to go over all the good draft picks they've made over the last 3 years, along with the undrafted free agents that this coaching staff has done. But the main point of this video is to show you it took 3 years. Another guy they brought in was John Embry, who was the tight end coach and assistant head coach. He also came in 2017. And much like, Saleh, the defensive coordinator, he has experience yet again coaching with him in the past. He coached with him at UCLA. He then coached with him again as the tight ends coach. I think it was either in Cleveland or Washington. But there were 2 stops. Maybe it was Tampa. There were 2 stops where he coached with Kyle Shannon. And Shanahan, much like Joe Judge, was finding the guys that he wanted for his staff as he went along. Guys that could teach his players. Started at Colorado as a volunteer in 91, then became the wide receivers tight ends coach in 92 for Douglas County High School. Went back to Colorado, tight ends coach for 2 years, then the defensive ends coach for 4, tight ends coach again for 2, so on and so forth. And you saw how he built up his resume before eventually getting the job with the San Francisco 49ers as an assistant head coach and tight ends coach. And that was a huge upgrade for him. Much like Patrick Graham, who's an assistant head coach now for the New York Giants. But that was another guy he brought on his staff who remains on his staff. And guess which tight end has broken out under his tutelage? George Kittle. He clearly has a good job there, and we're going to get into the draft picks, and George Kittle was one of them in 2017. But I just wanted to go over how he picked his staff, and none of these, a lot of people are calling for a guy like a Wade Phillips as a DC. They want all these experienced guys on the coaching staff, but the 49ers are showing you a clear, and a lot of teams do this. The 49ers were just the first team that popped in my head. Guys that the head coach coached with as he was coming up, guys he was familiar with, guys that he had coached with, and guys that he thought would bring strengths to the football team, much like that of a Joe Judge. Now, we're going to look at some of his draft picks. We're going to start with this year. Debo, I'm just going to show you how they built this team through the draft. Free agency, they had a number of misses, including this year. Quan Alexander was a bust for what they paid. I pretty much found very little success in free agency for this football team. Most of it was in the draft and in trades. Obviously, getting their quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, but you could even argue Jimmy Garoppolo was a draft pick. They traded a second-round pick to acquire him from the New England Patriots just a couple of years ago. Then they drafted Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa, of course, a game changer, certainly helped that defense tremendously, but again, continued to build through the draft. The year before, 2018, they got Fred Warner. Fred Warner's been a very good linebacker for the 49ers. They found him in the 3rd round, and he's been strong for them this year. I think he started every game. They also found Mike McGlinchey, and this is where the offensive line comes into play. Like I said, when Shannon had first taken over the roster, the offensive line ranked 32nd in run blocking, 30th in pass blocking. Since then, they've been no worse than middle of the pack. This year, they're 8th in run blocking, and I think 15th in pass blocking. There's been a dramatic improvement, and an early first-round draft pick in a Mike McGlinchey certainly has a lot to do with that. McGlinchey has manned the right tackle spot. They also spent some money in free agency on a former New York Giant there at the center position. So they've definitely revamped that offensive line. They also drafted, in a Weston Richburg, of course. They also drafted George Kittle. George Kittle in 2017 was a late-round draft pick in the 5th round. They took him out of Iowa. And the Giants have done similar things over the last few years, and that's why I think the Giants might be a year ahead of the curve, and maybe the Giants could be a very competitive team in 2 years. Maybe it won't take 3 because they have drafted well, especially last year with some of the players they brought in. But George Kittle is arguably their most important player on their offense. I think he is. And he was a 5th-round pick, but they got the most out of him. And I'm sure Embry has a lot to do with that because Shanahan picked coaches that he knew would fill the roles properly, much like Joe Judge is trying to do. So, there you have it. I wanted to go over some of the draft picks, what they did in free agency. Free agency, there was really nothing to look at. They tried in free agency. They also signed Pierre Garçon in 2017. Lynch has not done well there, but where he has done well is hiring a good coaching staff. The coaches brought in great assistants. They've made very good trades, and they've drafted very well. And I just wanted to show this to show Giant fans that if we're patient and you look at what they did, he inherited a 2-14 roster, and it didn't happen in 1 year. 2018, of course, there was injuries. Jimmy Garoppolo went down. They had an injury there to McKinnon, the running back, who another free agency pickup who hasn't really worked out. So they went 4-12. 2017, they were really bad until the end of the year where they got Garoppolo. And I think they won 5 straight down the stretch. They finished with 6 wins, so they were 1-10 maybe before that. And then this year they go 13-3. But I think it was a buildup. I think it was the coaching staff getting experience. I think this team was ready to pounce last year, even before they got a Nick Bosa. But Garoppolo went down, McKinnon went down, and everything fell apart. Of course, finishing as poorly as they did, that allowed them to get Bosa. But I think if you look at this model, I think the New York Giants are in a similar place to where the San Francisco 49ers were 3 years ago. I think we're a little bit more advanced, being that we have some talent on the roster already. You look at that 49ers roster, they didn't have much to write home about. But it goes to show you if you're patient and you do it the right way, you can build a team. And now the 49ers, they have potential to be a top-tier team for a very long period of time. And I hope the Giants build the team the same exact way. And, the Niners and Giants are very similar in terms of the way they built their coaching staff. Very young, both 38 years old. They brought in their guys. They didn't go for experience. They brought in guys that they're comfortable with. And the 49ers turned it into gold with a potential Super Bowl roster this year. So hopefully the Giants could do something similar. Obviously, we're going to add some pieces in free agency. Hopefully they hit. But the draft will be vitally important, and the development of these players under Joe Judge and the staff that he will be bringing in. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.